I got made fun of and not taken serious while I was in prison because I was Asian. That's right. You wouldn't be surprised on how many times I got discriminated against because I told the correctional staff when they asked you, what ethnicity are you? I said Japanese. Some of them could look and say, yeah, I can see that in your eyes. But a lot of them would automatically write me off because I don't sound Japanese. Well, just because I don't sound Japanese doesn't mean I'm not Japanese. My grandmother is full Japanese. She came to America on a boat. My mom is half Japanese. So that makes me, in theory, a quarter Japanese. I'm Japanese. I don't exist ethnically without Japan because that's where my origin goes to. I'm mostly French, but after French, I'm mostly Japanese. And when I went to prison and they asked you to check off the box on which you are, and you put Japanese, and then they change because I put white Japanese. They don't have a French spot. You know, underneath white, that means French, Italian, English, all that. They don't have a Japanese spot. They got Asian. So I put Asian, and then I'll put Japanese because they don't take you serious. What Asian are you? I'm Japanese. You know what I mean? Well, in Louisiana prisons, they got Asian people, mostly Vietnamese, and you might see an occasional Filipino or Chinese, but they ain't got no Japanese. Do you know a Japanese person? There ain't a whole lot of Japanese people in America. They have a Japanese population in California, and they do have some in Louisiana, some in Kansas. My family, my grandfather was in the military, and my mother was born in Kansas. And in Kansas, when you were born, back when my mom was born in the late 50s, you know what I mean? You just, whatever they said you were, that's what you were. And her father was white, so she got white on her birth certificate, you know. Now, when my grandfather and my grandmother moved to Louisiana, my other aunts who were born in Louisiana, they got Japanese on the birth certificate because Louisiana back in the 50s did it differently as well. Louisiana did it is whatever the mother was, that's what the child was. So my aunts are Japanese if they were born here, but my mother was white because in Kansas they did it whatever the father was on the birth certificate. It isn't like now where you can put mixed, you know. So being in prison, a lot of my friends who I grew up with who were also in prison with me, they would tell other convicts and other people we in prison with, they like, yeah, nah, he's Japanese. And so some of the people respected it and, you know, and treated it right, but some would mess with me because in prison, you know, they got whites stick with whites, blacks stick with blacks, and, you know, they got Vietnamese people, they stick together. But who the Japanese stick with? There ain't no Japanese population in prison. There ain't none, period. And the Vietnamese, they don't really care because I'm cool with some Vietnamese people because I grew up on the West Bank of New Orleans, and that's where they got buku Vietnamese at. And so I grew up around Vietnamese people. And so I'm cool with them. I've been in prison with them, but they don't too much care for Japanese people. They knew I was Japanese, but they mostly looked at me, you know, a little Asian mix, but mostly white. Here's the thing. When it came to nicknames, I remember they had a Vietnamese dude. And he had gold teeth, and he was, you know, like a little gangster Vietnamese dude. But the blacks called him Jap, J-A-P. They're like, "What's happening, Jap? What's up, Jap?" And some of the blacks who knew that I was actually Japanese and Asian mixed, they called me Chinese. And so I'm like, so they call the Vietnamese dude Jap, and they call the dude who's mixed with Japanese Chinese. They'd be like, "What's up, Chinese? What's up, Chinese?" You know what I mean? And so I'm like, dang, so you should probably be calling me Jap and calling him Vietnamese. I don't know if you're going to go like that. But that's not how prison nicknames go. And so if they didn't know you, and they, you know, that's just the way they referred to you as. Anyway, I remember my friends messing with me, you know what I mean? Because I'm like, well, yeah, when we go to prison, man, you know, you're going to have to stick with the whites, you know what I mean? You got to be they like, you're going to be like the Japanese Aryan. They used to mess with me a lot. They're like, the Japanese Aryan. Now, I know in California, the prison politics are a lot different. And, you know, there's a place for others, you know, like Pacific Islanders, and I'm assuming the Japanese. But I remember in American Me that Japo Mike, who's based on a real person, you know, he was with the Mexican mafia, you know, I remember in the movie, you know, he was Japanese. Anyway, man, in prison, I remember going through diagnostics and telling the people I was Japanese, and they just ignored me and they wrote it off. I'm at the point now when I go places, if they don't put it, I toss the paper back at them. You're going to put what I am. I'm white, but I'm also Asian. And so I don't want you to misrepresent me. I ain't trying to be anything other than I am. It's just what I am. You know what I mean? And so, I just rewrite it. I'm like, that ain't mean I toss it out their way. Because now, nowadays, nobody can, people could be whatever they want. You could be a chameleon and act like whoever you want nowadays. But that's just what I went through. I remember the Amigos in prison were cool, even back in the 90s when I was doing my time. I remember they used to call me Chanito, and I didn't know what Chanito meant, but Chanito means kind of like slant eyes, Asian eyes. And so they would be like, Chanito, what's up, Chanito, Chanito? And they all call me Chanito. So, that's one thing I respect about and even the Hispanic people that I know today, they still recognize for me being white Asian mix. They always respect exactly what you are. You don't have to pretend with them. They know what they are, and they want you to be okay with you are. And so even to this day, I have, my Hispanic people who I know, they're like, nah, this is my white Asian friend, But the main problem you get is honestly, from Asians and whites. I know that in Japan, they would not accept me. I know how it goes. Some of them would, but a lot of them wouldn't. But that don't mean nothing. When I do go to Japan, I'm not going to back down from nobody. You know what I mean? It's going to be what it's going to be because I am who I am. You saw The Last Samurai, So, and I'm not no samurai, But I know they got that Yakuza, But that's just my thoughts on being a mixed ethnicity inside a southern prison, inside Louisiana prisons. It's a different thing, and I know in California, everything is based on race. In Louisiana, mostly you got whites and blacks. In the South, mostly you got whites and blacks. Now, in the New Orleans area, you had a lot of Vietnamese. There's a lot more mixture now because the world has opened up since the 60s and the 70s. The world's a lot more open today, even from the 90s, but a lot of people don't take you serious, man. They just write you off. I still get it in the comments. People say stupid stuff, and you just got to ignore it. You got to take it with a grain of salt, but that's my experience with being a mixed Cajun Asian inside the Louisiana Southern prison system, man. Give me a like and subscribe to the Pen and The Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube. Let's do it.